Castro-Wooldridge, and thanks for recording. I'm an engagement strategist supporting the City of Boulder's
Do you want me
planning
to go here?
department.
I'm going to try logging in again. Could you connect your laptop? If I can't.
And just a reminder to please mute yourself. And later we'll be opening for Q&A. So I project manage this community assembly that we're going to be sharing with you about today. And
I'm Brenda Rittenauer. I am one of two community engagement managers at the City of Boulder, overseeing our whole engagement program. And I was the moderator for our community assembly.
Great. And as we kick off, please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. We'd love to see your name, where you're joining us from, and the sector you work in. For example, if you're government staff, what level of government, or if you're a consultant or work in the nonprofit sector, or whatever applies to you. So we're going to present for about 35 minutes, and then we'll open up to questions and discussion. But if you also have a pressing question or comment that pops into your mind as we present, go ahead and put that in the chat, and we'll just get to them as we can. So Brenda and I worked really closely together on the assembly, and we're so excited to share our journey and lessons with you today, and more generally about assemblies. Assemblies are a technique that that's more common in other countries around the world, but it's really starting to gain some traction in the United States for more representative democracy between election cycles. And last year, we, City of Boulder, with the Boulder County, hosted a community assembly for our city's comprehensive plan update. And you may hear them referred to as civic assembly or citizen jury or a combination of those words, but the principles are the same. So in our presentation, we'll cover what a community assembly is and how it differs from other engagement approaches. Sorry, Brenda, are you sharing?
Yes, I see.
Am I not sharing? Oh, I thought I was sharing.
I see your slide.
Okay, great.
Okay, yeah, great. Okay,
good.
I don't see it for some reason, but that's great. So in our presentation, we'll cover first what a community assembly is and how it differs from other engagement approaches, and an overview of our experience and lessons implementing one in Boulder. And there's just tons we could share. And so we grappled with where we should start, but we figured that many people may not be very familiar with assemblies yet. So we're going to focus on lessons we think are unique to our process, but then also the foundational pieces, including how to determine whether an assembly might be the right fit for your community, and assessing whether an organization is ready to support this kind of process as part of a longer term shift toward more inclusive and participatory engagement. So before we get into our Boulder specific story, I'll share some general information about assemblies. In a nutshell, an assembly is a deliberative engagement process that brings together a representative group of community members to learn about a complex issue, deliberate together, and develop collective recommendations for decision makers. And this graph on the screen shows the core building blocks of an assembly. So it starts with random selection. Community members are invited through a civic lottery process with some additional outreach in some cases to broaden participation and make sure that the final group selected for the assembly reflects the diversity of the community. The second key component is learning. So participants of the assembly hear from experts, stakeholders, people with lived experience, and they also learn from each other. So a really key part of this process is creating the time and structure for people with different perspectives to listen and ask questions and build understanding together, and to also help balance dominant voices in the room. And a final piece of this is the collective problem solving. So once you have representative cross-section of the community together, they deliberate together on the trade-offs of the issue they're looking at, identify areas of common ground, and develop collective recommendations that can really help guide public decisions on complex or polarizing issues. So in essence, an assembly is a collective problem solving, but also public learning process. And one key thing to keep in mind is that whoever's commissioned the assembly must be really open to being surprised by the outcome. So the idea is that we trust in the public's collective wisdom. And this slide has a lot of information on it, but it highlights some key differences between a community assembly and traditional engagement approaches you may be more familiar with. So first, assemblies are not meant to replace other engagement tools. They're really designed to do something different. So unlike working groups, or most working groups are open participation processes like an open house, assemblies use a random selection process to create a group that more closely reflects the broader community. And something else that sets it apart is that it operates with a fixed mandate or a fixed question or challenge. So the core question and then all the parameters around it are defined up front and do not continually evolve through staff-led iteration. So we find in Boulder that this is very different from a working group, for example, where scope creep is pretty common, and the questions that you come back to the working group with may change depending on staff needs or evolution of a project. Assemblies also really emphasize learning and deliberation and not just collecting a whole bunch of different opinions. So the goal is to help participants work through trade-offs together and identify those areas of informed common ground on a complex issue. And a final piece is that assemblies are typically tied directly to decision making. So with a very clear commitment from decision makers about how recommendations will be used, or if not used, why. And I'll talk a little bit about legitimacy. So our design consultants, our macro design consultants really drilled this into us when we were designing our assembly. So when designing it, you're really designing for legitimacy, in part because we can anticipate criticism for trying something new. So these are 3 points that are important and really contribute to the legitimacy of an assembly. First is that random selection of participants. So not cherry picking or just relying on self-selection. And then second is the diversity and representation of the group that's been selected and making sure it's really a cross-section of the community. And the third piece for legitimacy is ensuring balance in the information that is provided to the assembly for their deliberations. So for example, making sure that the speakers that are lined up represent different perspectives and are not seen to be pushing, either perceived or actually pushing the assembly in a certain direction. And assemblies fall into the collaborate space on the IAP2 spectrum, where the promise to the public is to incorporate the recommendations into the decisions to the maximum extent possible, which is the instruction that our mayor gave to staff the night the assembly presented the recommendations to our city council and planning board, which is super satisfying to see that he's familiar with this language. But more on this part of the process later in our presentation. Over to you, Brenda.
Sure, thanks. And Vivian, I can't see the chat at all, so I'm trusting you to let me know if there's anything urgent popping up in the chat. So why an assembly in Boulder? So before I jump into what we did, we wanted to start with this why. Why would we trust a random group of everyday people to weigh in on complex policy questions? For all the reasons we do engagement, right? But why dive into this new and deeper and heavy resource process, right? So I wanted to share a little bit about our community with you in answering this question. You can see on this slide, we're a smallish city. We're at the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. It's incredibly gorgeous to be in the town where we work and where Vivian lives. And we have some interesting pressures. Our population increases by 1/3 during weekday daytime hours. Our in-commuters are about 45,000 to 60,000 daily. And we also have a commitment to open space, right? We're one of the first cities in the country to have a dedicated tax to preserving the open space in and around our city. And that means it limits our ability to expand our built environment. So issues about growth and density get full of emotion really quickly in our community. I'm also sharing these demographics with you to highlight that our community is truly white dominated. It's highly educated. It's mostly affluent. And we do have a high poverty rate within that. We're a university town, so our students can be, some of that poverty rate is attributed to our students who don't often have reportable income. But we do have pockets of poverty. We know them well. And unfortunately, often, but not always, those folks are immigrants, people of color, and older adults, right? So those are our voices that tend to get lost. We find that the people who don't match our dominant demographic don't get a lot of space to be heard, even when they're able to be in the room. So even as we create inclusive engagement environments, often those voices still end up the loudest voices that we hear. So we have the changes listed here, which I'm sure many of you do in your communities. These are not new or surprising. A few loud voices and the more privileged perspectives, often with specific agendas, dominate our engagement conversations. We have been working for many years on creating different pathways so that that's not true of the full scope of engagement that comes before our decision makers. And this was really a step in that direction. Another challenge that we find with traditional engagement and even many of the inclusive processes we do now is that there's rarely the time or the structure for people, whether they're the same background or different backgrounds, but certainly for people with different backgrounds to really listen to each other, to work through trade-offs and to find common ground. So the assembly model really appealed to us because it offered a way to broaden the participation and also to get a set of recommendations that would be a more legitimate and useful set because they were really agreed upon by this representative cross-section of our community. So these challenges, these challenges become even more prominent when the topic is about long-range planning. So we mentioned that our assembly was one engagement strategy of our comprehensive plan update. The Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan, which we call the BVCP, addresses many policy topics and has a 20-year horizon. And so we find that that is complex and it's abstract. And it's hard for people to really figure out what it is we're talking about in the room when we're talking about it. Historically, only those who understand why it's important have really gotten involved in these update processes. It's updated every 10 years. And this time, with Vivian's leadership, we really made a commitment to conducting the most inclusive engagement process our city has ever achieved to date. And to do this, we really needed to figure out ways to work differently. So we worked in a lot of different ways, but one of them was an assembly. Taking a quick step back, a few years ago, I took a 6-week training about assemblies with an organization called Healthy Democracy. And as I learned more, I realized that this technique was really a great choice for our community for all the challenges I've named. And then I started to also learn how expensive and time-consuming the process can be. And I realized that maybe the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan update with dedicated staff time and budget was our only opportunity to try. So Vivian then set out to learn more, learned everything she could, met everyone who was a practitioner in this space, so that when the time came to talk about the comp plan update, we were ready. We pitched it and our planners got really, really excited about it. So that was a gift to us to get to try this. We thought the time was also right for other reasons. We have a racial equity plan at the City of Boulder where we have stated goals about our commitments to broadening our inclusive engagement. And our city's been on a journey of shifting our organization from check the box engagement to meaningful and inclusive engagement. We've been on that journey for about 10 years. And so we have programs and we have infrastructure that are in place to support experimentation. So now Vivian's going to share a little bit about our mandate.
Oh, yes. Okay, sorry. Great. So the mandate, which you can also think of as the problem or challenge that the assembly will grapple with. So as Brenda mentioned, this assembly was part of our comprehensive plan update, which is really this opportunity to make major policy shifts. And we landed on asking the assembly to help us answer this question that you can see on the screen of how and where can Boulder implement 15-minute neighborhoods? And a general or generic definition of a 15-minute neighborhood is that these are places where you can walk or roll for daily needs without relying on a car. So in Boulder, we hear really broad support or general support for more walkable neighborhoods in principle, but we find strong opposition for it in practice. And this topic also touches a lot of aspects of the comp plan. And so we needed help. We need the community's help to know if this is something we should be leaning into strongly or lightly or not at all for this comprehensive plan update. And the comprehensive plan itself is really too large and complex for an assembly to deal with in its whole. So we had to choose a narrower topic that fit within that larger discussion. And mandates for assemblies really do need to be specific, narrow, and of high importance, both to the community and to decision makers. And it should also be something that's hard. If it's not hard enough, then there might be better engagement tactics that use less resources and can help address the problem. And as you can imagine from some of these arguments that you can see on this slide for and against 15-minute neighborhoods, flashpoints about density and traffic get in the way of broader, more solutions-based discussions. And we were hoping that the assembly would give us a way to have this conversation differently. So citywide with a diverse representative group and not only the loudest voices, and who could really think beyond their specific neighborhood and consider what's best for Boulder as a whole and tell us that. Over to you, Brenda.
Great. Thank you. So what did this look like in Boulder? So wanted to give you just a little sense of what it was like. Here's a couple of pictures. The group met for 7 full-day sessions over several months. We took the summer off because nobody wants to be inside in the summer in Boulder, or most places. We met in a big gathering space in one of our rec centers. They spent most of their time at tables together, learning from experts, having small group discussions, and then bringing their ideas to the full group. They did also get to go on a bus and walking tour of some representative neighborhoods in Boulder. The agendas of these meetings were highly structured, and table facilitators kept everyone on track. So slowly but surely, they circled in on what they could agree on. So there were so many people involved in making this project successful for us. We started really with a goal of capacity building. So we in our organization wanted to do this in a way that we could learn how to do this. But we didn't realize how unique that was when we set out to do it. Most places hire a third-party organization for many good reasons to come in and run the whole process for them. But because we wanted to come out with tools and a toolbox, we had, and we felt like we had some internal capacity, we chose to be a partner in the implementation. But we knew we needed a lot of expertise in every part of this process. So you see on the slide all the different partners that we worked with. I'm going to give a specific shout out to our university partners. Working with universities is a really great way to do democratic processes. We, on this one in particular, benefited from our academic partners who led all of the deliberation parts of the process. And also we're looking at this work from a research lens. So that meant that they brought in their own team of students to be our table facilitators, which was a great resource to us. But then also those same students helped unpack what happened at those tables between each session so that the design could continue to iterate based on what was needed next because of what happened previously. It's not something we could have handled with just our own capacity internally. So then once we had our team, then we needed the mandate. Vivian spoke a little bit about the mandate. And actually that process is backwards, right? Most of the time an assembly happens because of an existing identified problem that fits the mold of what an assembly does best. But we wanted to learn a technique. So we started with a technique and then we figured out what problem might fit that technique. And so we don't necessarily recommend that process, but it was the way we did it and we got a lot out of it. It's also more common that a city council or an elected leadership would commission the assembly as the method to get the recommendations that they need on something controversial. This is also something that we did backwards. We have a city manager council form of government in Boulder, so we worked with our city manager's office on the decision-making part of it. First, we pitched the idea to them and they approved it. And then we went and did the groundwork with our council to make sure that they would be supportive. We did that groundwork piece was really important to make sure that once we were sort of in the public forum, they understood what it was that we were planning to do and could be supportive of it. You can see on this slide that was a thoughtful process that was informed by community, but it was really driven by staff. Staff knows where we get stuck in these policy conversations and where the community gets the most polarized. And so we started from there and had a big list that we pared down, and then ultimately our city manager made that decision. There were also a lot of design decisions that had to be made as we started to envision what this process would look like. Each of those decisions also has time and cost implications. So we decided to have 48 members to maximize our diversity. We decided to include youth voices, but 16 and up at the coaching of our city attorney's office, because under 16 would need different types of legal paperwork and permissions. 7 sessions seemed like the maximum amount of time we could ask for from our community, and also was enough time to get the job done. We made sure to have geographic balance across our planning area. So our planning area is the city of Boulder, but also because it's the Boulder Valley, includes about a 3-mile radius around the city of unincorporated county. So we wanted to really make sure that county voice was also represented. And we set diversity goals to include people with different housing situations. So we had homeowners, renters, and people who live in manufactured housing. We also had a mix of racial and ethnic backgrounds, LGBTQ plus identities, and people with disabilities. The goal was to bring as wide a range of people and experiences into the room. So that was our 7 representation criteria. And we also made sure that we had a fully bilingual process. So to secure our applicant pool, we randomly mailed 10,000 invitations. That was all at the coaching of our macro design partner, Mass LBP. And we really wanted to reach people who we don't always see and to fulfill those points of our representation model. So we oversampled that mailing in areas that we know have populations of lower incomes and higher in racial and ethnic diversity. We also did some strategic outreach with community partners to make sure that we had a healthy applicant pool to draw from. We ended up with an applicant pool of about 250 people, and we knew that would satisfy our representation model. We watched those applications come in, and we did extra outreach where we weren't quite hitting enough of a pool to draw from. So it really was an effort all the way through. So I mentioned representation model. What is a representation model? A representation model, we were in partnership again with Mass LBP to design what that would look like. And what it does is it defines the aims and goals of the community assembly representation so that the random selection process is selected against this model. So it's not fully random, because in a community like ours, it would still end up pretty homogeneous room. And so you create your representation model and then you do the random selection against the representation model. Again, very grateful to our third-party partner for doing that part for us, both for the technical reasons and also for ethical reasons. It made sure that as those lists were being given to us of who had been drawn and who to call next, we didn't have to make those decisions about our community members. We just went with the list that was handed to us. The ultimate goal is to find the balance of attributes that support the concept of effective representation. So we have our percentages of what our population looks like. We also have our equity goals, and that helped us reach these target range numbers. And also the attributes combined have to support effective random selection process, right? Um, and so we had 7 criteria, which is really the maximum number you probably want to have. And actually, our consultants would have preferred if we had 6 or fewer. We pushed it because we wanted to push our diversity. And so it did make our drawing a little trickier, which was a trade-off we were happy to live with. It also made our room a little larger. We had 48 because we really wanted to have no one be alone in that room. We made sure that every demographic we were selecting against had at least 3 people in the room, and that led us to have a larger number than we otherwise might have had. So here is what some of the demographics of that room ended up looking like, so that you can see that spread. As one of our assembly members put it, on any given Saturday, this was probably the most diverse room in Boulder. And as you can see, it still lacked some layers of diversity. So we were in that space where we felt good about what we had done, and also folks in the room felt like there sometimes weren't enough of them in the room. We also worked hard to make sure that, I said that we had no one who had less than 3 members that shared their demographic in the room with them. And I already said the next thing on my notes, so I'm going to go on to the next slide. We have ourselves pinned down to some pretty specific notes because, as we noted, we can say a lot of things in a lot of directions about this process. So we wanted to be as clear as possible for you today. The other thing that we all know who do engagement these days, and particularly when you're focused on inclusion, that removing barriers is essential. And so we thought hard about what those barriers might look like and how to make the room, once we got a diverse room together, how do we make sure that everyone in that room can fully show up and participate as their full selves with comfort and confidence. So it was about recruitment, but also about what was happening each day in the room. So we offered a $1,000 stipend for participating in all 7 sessions. We paid that in installments, so people didn't have to wait till the end to get that $1,000. And so folks who had to drop out for emergency reasons at various points were still compensated for the work that they had done. We provided plenty of nourishing food for all sorts of diets, and so very much coffee during the day, which we learned was really, really important. We provided transportation assistance for folks who needed it. We had on-site childcare. We had 4 junior members of the assembly who were 5 and under, who were in a separate room each day that we met, and happy to see each other each time. We had interpretation and translation for our Spanish-speaking members. We also created a quiet room for participants with sensory sensitivities, a place that they could just go and get away from all of the input. And we also had a community liaison, that's who you see in this picture, who was always available for whatever physical or emotional support people might need through the day. And people definitely spent some time with her. Providing these supports made people not only feel really cared for, but it also helped them preserve their energy for the hard work that we were asking them to do. And the other piece that we can talk a lot about and are always happy to share more about is the language access piece. It was really important to us to be able to support a bilingual environment. 4% of our population have limited English proficiency, and without extra intention, they simply cannot be heard at all in engagement processes. So Spanish is our largest language other than English. And so we really, really wanted to be able to be welcoming to monolingual Spanish speakers. We had a fully bilingual application, and we did a lot of outreach to make sure that this population was aware that this process was also for them. And although it was not one of our demographic points, we did welcome 6 participants who preferred to give and receive information in Spanish. We also had several bilingual folks in the room. So this commitment is something that we had to work on each and every time and had to iterate between every session. We had dual slide decks running at all times. We really tried to find resources that were either available both in English and Spanish, or a comparable resource was available in Spanish. We created a thoughtful progression from one Spanish-speaking table that helped build confidence and comfort and trust in the room to two bilingual tables, one of which was always facilitated in Spanish. We assigned seats every day, and later on in the process, we changed seats from the morning to the afternoon so that everyone in the room had a chance to cycle through those bilingual tables and hear directly from their Spanish-speaking neighbors and communicate together. And equity also impacted the way we structure facilitation. So just having interpretation in the room doesn't make for equitable engagement. You also have to create practices that help those voices that are being used in Spanish to be front and center some of the time, right? Otherwise, those voices can easily start to fade into the background. We could do a whole webinar on what that equity looked like. So we're not going to do that today. We're going to encourage you to ask questions at the end or to reach out to us if this is a topic of interest to you that you'd like to learn more about. All right. And ultimately, our room of folks agreed on their recommendations. They gave us a definition for 15-minute neighborhoods, including essential services. They gave us principles for selecting locations. They gave us recommendations on implementation, and they identified and named some challenges and opportunities that they wanted to make sure our policymakers were aware of. We encourage you to go to the website we'll share at the end to check out our full report. That report also has a lot of process in it too, so it is a good reference document for how we did what we did. Our facilitators compiled that final report, but they did it in collaboration with Assembly members. The Assembly themselves nominated and elected 6 report reviewers and 3 presenters. Those presenters sat before the City Council and the city's planning board to present the recommendations at a high level and answer a whole lot of questions from those decision-making bodies. I was there as well as our lead facilitator so that we could field any of the questions that were outside of the scope of the panel members or lean too far into specific political agendas. So back to Vivian to share more about what we've learned about the mandate that we chose.
Yeah, and just wanted to thank everyone for being engaged in the chat too. There's a few questions coming in, so appreciate that. So this is probably one of our biggest lessons, and it's related to the mandate. And this is really what we're sharing about what we know now with hindsight. So we definitely received recommendations from the Assembly that are very thoughtful, rich, and will be useful for decades. And at the same time, this mandate on 15-minute neighborhoods was really challenging because it is multi-layered and the impacts may not be felt for a while. They'll probably be incremental. And also the topic we heard may not address many people's other more pressing and immediate concerns or be something that is top of mind for everybody. Also, the city is one actor among many in development in the city, and not everything is in the city's control, even though we can write some of the land use rules and regulations. So what we've learned from this is that assemblies are probably strongest when participants can clearly connect their recommendations to decisions and actions. And we share that because we want to share what we've learned, and it doesn't mean that you shouldn't use an assembly for long range planning, but you just need to be aware that it can be more complex than other types of mandates and then be ready to manage that risk. And this complexity also probably impacted on our trust score. So we had FIDE North America doing an independent evaluation, and they found that the average level of trust did not increase much from the first session to the last session, even though 74% of Assembly members said that they would like to see assemblies become a permanent fixture in local government. So we think there might be a story there to tell related to our mandate. So maybe a key takeaway is that if participants can't clearly see the impact, trust in the process could be at risk. And because the community assembly was a process within a process, so it was embedded within the comprehensive plan update, which still has not yet been adopted, we needed some extra steps to close the loop with assembly members. So in a typical assembly, participants present their recommendations directly to decision makers who then respond to them. And our process was more complicated because staff are still working on the draft, which will be adopted this summer. So to bridge that gap, we created a companion document that shows how each of the assembly's recommendations is incorporated into the draft plan and where it appears, or why it also might be outside the plan's scope and could be something further down the line in implementation. This companion document really does help both assembly members and decision makers understand how the recommendations are being practically applied. And ultimately, when the policymakers adopt the plan, this will also mean that they accept the recommendations of the assembly as staff has proposed to implement them. So there's just a few more steps with our complex mandate, and we did find a way to make it work, but it requires some additional coordination. And we also learned that ongoing communication on a topic that's multi-layered like this remains a challenge in a long and complex process. So in this next section, I'll highlight some of the main sessions at different stages. And we've mentioned a few of them already, so I'm really just going to pull out some of the new ones for you. And you can, of course, ask us questions later about anything you want to know more about during the Q&A. So one important lesson from the planning stage is to involve your legal counsel early. Because of legal precedent around affirmative action in the US and different organizational risk tolerances, we really recommend getting legal advice on the representation model because that might vary between city and agency. And since assemblies are designed for legitimacy, it's important to ensure the process cannot be easily challenged. So in Boulder, our legal counsel advised that we should use demographic target ranges and not strict quotas. And they also advised that we could ask about race and ethnicity because it was not the sole selection criteria. But again, other cities have received different guidance, so it's important to work closely with your own legal team. On the learning piece, I want to highlight two things. First, Boulder had an advisory group comprised of 6 trusted community members who are not advocates for, or at least not well-known advocates for or against 15-minute neighborhoods. And they helped us review the learning program and provide feedback on whether it felt balanced. And that balance is really important for maintaining neutrality and being able to respond to any criticism that the process was pre-baked or biased in a given direction. And second, one of the strengths of an assembly model is that participants can help shape the learning process itself. So assembly members identified topics that they wanted to learn more about in order to deliberate effectively. And that just means that the program needs to build in enough flexibility to evolve throughout the process. And on deliberation, so you bring a diverse group of people into the room, and then what? How do you create a good experience once they're there? So we found that shared ground rules, which are super common, of course, helped create a respectful environment. But those existing power dynamics don't disappear at the door. And so strong facilitation is essential to recognize and manage both those subtle and more obvious dynamics as they emerge. And one example, during an activity, the facilitators intentionally seated the loudest voices together so that they would have less impact on others and have to sort through their dynamics themselves. But it's just important to expect that these power dynamics will be there and have tools to manage them. And finally, assemblies do not have to be large. Brenda mentioned this. So ours had 48, but smaller models can also work well. We're aware, for example, that the city of Los Angeles just kicked off an assembly on a really big topic, and they have 20 people, and Los Angeles is much bigger than Boulder. So on closing the loop, so I touched on this before, but if assembly members and the public cannot understand how recommendations are tied to impacts, it can corrode trust in the process itself. So closing the loop is very, 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 very important. And before I hand it over to Brenda to close this out and start the Q&A, I just want to emphasize that an assembly is not something to take on lightly. It does require significant time, effort, and resources. but it is also an important investment, an investment in the community, in democratic innovation, and in ourselves as engagement practitioners. And for us, for the City of Boulder, we now have a valuable new tool for tackling complex and polarizing issues. And we could even apply elements of the model, like the random selection, to other processes in the future, like working groups or focus groups. And a key lesson we learned is that this cannot be a fully staff-led process. We started out thinking that eventually we could do most of an assembly ourselves. And we learned that in the practitioner world, that was also, that idea was pretty unique. But we really learned that for an assembly to be seen as credible and neutral, strong, independent facilitation and structure are essential. Thank you. Over to you, Brenda.
Yeah. So how do you start if you are in your community thinking, I wonder if this is something we should do? So we just wanted to provide you with sort of this list of questions that we feel have been helpful to us in thinking through whether to do an assembly and sort of how to get going. So is an assembly a good fit for your problem? You've heard how the mandate that we chose gave us really useful results, but also may not have been exactly the right model of a mandate for assemblies. Is your organization ready? It's a high level of new, right? It's a lot of experimentation. It takes a lot of effort. I feel like I used every muscle I have built through my time as a community engagement professional in doing this process. So are you and your team ready? Is your organization ready? Who needs to buy in? Do you have a council or decision makers who are interested in new processes and interested in a depth of community engagement in order to make their decisions? If they're not that interested, then it probably won't be a very satisfying process for anyone. So they need to be bought in, and do we have good pathways to getting their buy-in? What capacity do you have internally, right? Vivian and I worked most of our time during the assembly on the assembly, although she was doing other things for the comp plan, but also other members of our team worked on it too. So it really took a good deep bench to get this done. And what pieces should you get external support for? You saw the slide of all the partners, and it really took all of them to get it done. It might take a few less of them the next time around we do it, but we can never do it alone. So these are just things to think about in your own community as you look toward an assembly or not. Other ideas for next steps, we encourage visiting the websites of the folks that helped us get started, Healthy Democracy, Mass LBP. They have lots of case studies of work they've done. Mass has done more than 50 processes in Canada, in addition to helping us with ours. FIDE is an organization that started in Europe, but also now has a North America branch. We are a case study on their website, on the website that you see there. And also, we encourage you to go to our comprehensive plan website, boulderfuture.org, where there's a tab for the community assembly where you can find our final report. So we are excited to have come and talked with you about this. As we said, we can tell this story in many ways. We hope the way we've chosen to tell it to you today has been useful. And now we're curious to know what you're curious about. So we're happy to answer questions for the rest of our time together. We're also always happy to jump on a call and answer specific questions with you at a different time, share more about our experience and learn more about what you're working on. So I think, Shyla, we should just take hands or however this works best for you. Maybe we have some questions in the chat that Vivian has seen that we could start with.
Yeah,
You all tell me.
We can start with there's a question about the budget. So
Great.
we ended up, or we started out budgeting 150,000 plus staff time. So that does not include our time as staff working on the assembly. And it ended up costing 162,000. So a little bit of a cost overrun, but not too bad. And that was funded half by the planning department who was leading the comp plan and half by our communications and engagement department because of the engagement innovation. So the comms engagement department really felt that this was something that the organization could learn from, and so contributed quite substantially. That worked well. And I think, was there any pushback on cost from leadership? No, we had clear direction from our city council to be innovative and bold with our entire approach to the comp plan. And so we felt that we had support, and we did not really specifically publicize the budget for the assembly itself. It was wrapped up together with the rest of the comp plan budget. And we also, this might be a little bit different from other cities, but we didn't rely on many any technical consultants for the comp plan. And so we weren't spending a lot of money on other consultants except for a statistically valid survey. But so the bulk of resources did go to the assembly for our comp plan update. But I know a lot of other cities outsource a lot of their comp plan work.
I'm scrolling through the chat and I see a question about repeating how long the assembly met and how long each session was. So our assembly met for 7 sessions. We started in May. We did 2 sessions in May, and these were all day long sessions, so about 7.5 hours with breaks throughout. So we did 2 sessions in May, and then we took a break for the summer and had 5 more sessions in the fall, starting at the end of August and through the middle of October. So we did them every other week once we came back in the fall. And the nice thing about that summer break was that it's nice to have a break in the summer, but also we got to a place after that second session where we could ask the assembly what they needed to learn more about. And then we could go away and design those next sessions to incorporate the things that they asked for. So we were a little hesitant about it at first, but then once we were in it, we realized that that 3 months was incredibly useful to us. I'm just flipping through.
How was participation attendance
Mhm.
overall? So
Mhm.
we lost 5 people. So we randomly selected 48, and on the last day we had 43. And one person only attended the first session. And the other 4 had to stop for like big
Various reasons.
circumstances, yeah, accidents, other family circumstances. But we really think that paying in installments was useful, and also the liaison's job was really to check in with people in between and see if there was anything we could do to make them more comfortable or hear how it's going, and send reminders. So we asked people how they prefer to be like how should we communicate with them, and we either called or sent emails or whatever they told us to do. Yeah, we were also happy with that participation also, because expecting people to give up 7 Saturdays, right? And we heard from people that sometimes they were hesitant to come, but then they were so happy they were there. And so it was hard work for sure, but also we heard that people found it satisfying.
I'm seeing a question about the stipend. Yeah, the $1,000 stipend, we were given permission to do that without contracting. We did it through gift cards. And so by doing that, we were able to do that without making people fill out a lot of paperwork. We don't know what types of barriers paperwork might have presented for the people in the room with us, but we didn't want it to be a barrier. So we made that choice, and our finance team was behind us on that. And then I'm also seeing another question about ASL, which is a great question. Thank you so much, American Sign Language Interpretation. It was something that we would be prepared to provide if we had been asked for it. We did dedicated outreach into our community of people with disabilities of all kinds, and really wanted to be as welcoming as possible. So as we called each person to tell them that they were drawn in the selection, we had a conversation with them, and we had an onboarding form that really dug into what accommodations they might need to make their time with us as productive and comfortable for them as possible. So we didn't end up needing that resource, but it's something that we would have offered should we need should we have needed that in the room. Feel free to throw a hand up if you have a question that we're not getting to. We'll just keep strolling and picking.
I see a good question about working with university teams and how you suggest we approach them. So the group that we worked with was in the communications and democracy department, something along those lines. So you could see if there's anybody who is a deliberation expert. And we were lucky that we have some really great experts locally, but it could even be a way to work with grad students as small table facilitators. Like even if you don't have people who are considered experts in the deliberation field, you still might be able to find some partnerships that could be useful for other engagement. And we didn't go into this much, but the university group that we worked with is actually doing a lot of research from the assembly on equitable engagement. And so it's kind of an ongoing partnership, which is really exciting. Yes, so appetite among assembly members. So we're really proud and excited about, we have one assembly member who has, and maybe I should first say that Brenda and I are in community a lot, and we didn't know, we knew a couple of people in the room, but they were not really our frequent flyers. We knew them more as the children of people who we do see in some events, but it wasn't dominated by people who are regularly in meetings. So one woman has already signed up for our Human Rights Commission. It's like an advisory board for the city. And another has signed up for our equity advisory group. It's called the Community Connectors and Residents. So two people are in like structured advisory roles for the city, which is really great. And we also asked people on the first day if they had ever been to a city event or engaged with the city, and 73% said no, it was their first time. And on the last day, 93% said they would like to continue to be engaged. And so we have been reaching out to the different members to understand like what those different pathways could be and what they're interested in.
Yep. Yeah.
So yeah, the gift card thing can be tricky for sure. We also do sometimes partner with organizations for that purpose as well.
Like
for this,
as a nonprofit fiscal partner, like fiscal sponsor partners who could do that type of payment for us. For other processes, we do that. This one we were able to work with our finance team and they told us we could go ahead and do it.
Yeah, so there's a question about immigration ICE activity. So we actually didn't set out allowing public observation of our assembly. So we committed to assembly members that we would respect their privacy and we didn't ask anything about immigration status. It wasn't one of the criteria. And we then at some point decided that we would open up the observation to the media and the public for half of a day. But we weren't comfortable with that immediately. And we had talked about having some backup plan in case we did have some ICE activity, but it ended up being okay. Go ahead, Brenda.
Yes. So we met in a room that had doors that were not open to the public. One of them was kept open most of the time, but it was a door that we would be able to close if we needed to. The days that we did have invite the public in to watch what we were doing, they had to RSVP, and we had to have their name on a list. So this is also something that we've learned is really unique to our process from other assemblies. Other assemblies are a much more visible process. And it was really a choice that we made to protect our participants for all sorts of reasons, right? Not just for ICE reasons, but to protect them from influence from other community members, right? We have the kind of community where people will come up to you in the grocery store if they know that you're on a engagement group like this. If they know you're on a working group or they know you're on a board or commission, they'll come up to you in the grocery store and tell you how they feel about things, which is wonderful. We're glad our community is that way. And we thought it might be an intimidating atmosphere for folks who were doing this kind of thing for the first time to have to be in. So we did not release their names until the end of the process. And we kept our doors pretty closed. It was nice to be able to have the media come in and spend half a day with the assembly and do some reporting out on it. We gave some pretty clear instructions to our assembly members that they were not required to talk to the media, that they did not have to share anything about themselves they didn't want to share, and that they shouldn't speak for the whole assembly. They should only speak for themselves. And that seemed to work well. So the media got some really great stuff for a story, and our assembly members did not feel adversely impacted by that experience. With our community members who observed, we just kept them in an observation area. During breaks and things, they were welcome to walk up to whoever they wanted to walk up to, and we gave our assembly members the same guidance.
And also, this could be a point that you seek guidance on from legal counsel.
Mhm.
So we know that another city in Colorado, their council said that the sunshine laws should apply. So which means that if you have two or more decision makers together, you have to have it open to the public. But we had different guidance.
Yeah, we were able to lean on the fact that these were not decision makers, that nothing that they decided on in the room together was going to definitely be enacted. And so that gave us some security that we could keep our process closed. So we just have one more minute. I'm just going to quickly share again the slide that I have up that has our information on it, but also, as Vivian said earlier in the chat, we will share these slides with Shyla so that she can share them out with you. And again, we're happy to have you reach out to us and have a conversation with you if you wish.
Yeah, and we're
Thanks so
working
much
on
for
a
joining us.
we're working on a retrospective video too. So you could check our website in a couple of months. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. We will post
Thank
the
you.
video on our membership. If you're a member, you have access to the webinar page that will post the recording, and we'll also send an email out to everyone registered. And if Brenda and Vivian, you're comfortable sharing your slides, I can get those out in the email as well. So great. Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Awesome.
Great.